What if the most powerful person in every room isn't the loudest one, but the one who barely needs to speak at all? Most people spend their entire lives chasing respect, trying to prove their intelligence, defend their opinions, and earn validation from people who were never going to value them in the first place. They believe confidence comes from being noticed, admired, or accepted. But psychology tells a very different story. The harder someone tries to be respected, the more that respect slips away. It's a paradox that almost nobody understands, and yet it's one of the oldest principles behind lasting influence. Machiavelli observed centuries ago that power rarely belongs to the person who reacts the fastest. It belongs to the one who controls perception, masters emotion, and remains impossible to read. While everyone else is trapped in emotional battles, desperately explaining themselves or seeking approval, a small number of people quietly build something far more valuable: psychological dominance. They don't chase attention. Somehow, attention follows them. They don't demand respect. People offer it naturally, and they never seem to lose control, even when everyone around them does. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people unknowingly sabotage their own authority every single day. They speak too soon, reveal too much, react too emotionally, and give others a complete map of their fears, insecurities, and intentions. Then they wonder why they're ignored, underestimated, or manipulated. The problem isn't a lack of intelligence. It's a lack of strategic silence, emotional detachment, and the invisible habits that create an untouchable presence. In this video, you'll discover the psychological principles that quietly shape authority long before words ever do. You'll learn why some people naturally command obedience without raising their voices, how Machiavellian influence works beneath the surface of everyday interactions, and why the strongest form of power is often the one nobody notices until it's already too late. By the end, you'll never look at confidence, influence, or human behavior the same way again. Most people think an untouchable presence is something a person is born with, but that's one of the biggest illusions ever created. In psychology, true confidence is rarely loud. It's built in silence, repetition, and private victories that nobody applauds. Someone inspired by Machiavelli understands that certainty doesn't come from convincing other people. It comes from convincing himself first. That's why he never rushes to prove his worth. He lets consistency speak while everyone else is busy making speeches. Funny enough, the less he tries to impress, the more unforgettable he becomes. He gradually learns that emotional reactions are expensive, and every unnecessary outburst gives someone else a map to his mind. Strategic silence becomes more than saying fewer words. It becomes a disciplined habit of observing before acting. When criticism appears, he doesn't rush to defend himself because he knows that immediate reactions usually satisfy the attacker more than the defender. Instead, he watches patterns, not opinions. That single habit creates the beginning of psychological dominance, because calmness always feels stronger than emotional chaos. People often mistake silence for weakness, right until silence wins. Imagine walking into a meeting where everyone is competing to be heard. One person interrupts, another exaggerates, another desperately searches for approval. Then someone sits comfortably, speaks only after listening, and says a single sentence that redirects the entire conversation. That's not luck, that's psychology in action. That quiet confidence instantly changes how everyone measures authority. The room naturally starts giving more weight to fewer words, and without realizing it, people begin following the calmest person instead of the loudest. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. Like building physical strength, the mind develops through repeated moments of choosing discipline over impulse. Emotional detachment begins with small decisions, not answering every message immediately, not explaining every personal choice, not reacting to every provocation. These tiny actions seem insignificant at first, yet together they reshape identity. Over time, people stop seeing someone who constantly seeks acceptance and start noticing someone who simply expects respect. That's when Machiavellian influence starts operating without obvious effort. Many people unknowingly destroy their own aura because they constantly ask, "Did they like me?" The wiser question is completely different. Did I remain aligned with my principles? That shift changes everything. validation becomes optional instead of necessary, and confidence stops depending on other people's moods. Psychology repeatedly shows that individuals who aren't emotionally dependent become naturally more influential. Ironically, people trust certainty far more than constant self-promotion, even if they can't explain why. Little by little, this quiet certainty becomes visible without ever asking for attention. His posture changes, his decisions become cleaner, and his words carry more weight simply because they're no longer wasted and untouchable. Presence is never created through performance. It emerges from internal order that the outside world can't help but notice. Still, mastering himself is only the first layer of the game. The next challenge isn't controlling who he is. It's learning how to control what everyone else believes they see. Most people spend their lives trying to reveal who they are. But someone who understands psychology knows that mystery is often more valuable than transparency. Machiavelli recognized that perception shapes reality long before reality has a chance to defend itself. That's why truly influential people don't rush to explain every decision or expose every emotion. They understand that the less predictable they become, the more carefully others observe them. An unreadable mind naturally creates curiosity, and curiosity quietly evolves into respect. That's the invisible doorway to psychological dominance. The strongest people in any room are rarely the ones displaying the most emotion. They aren't emotionless. They're simply in control of when, where, and how those emotions are revealed. Strategic silence allows them to process situations before reacting, making every response intentional instead of impulsive. Imagine someone insulting them in public, expecting an angry reaction. Instead of taking the bait, they smile slightly, maintain eye contact, and continue as if nothing happened. That unexpected calm often creates far more discomfort in the aggressor than any argument ever could. Body language speaks long before words arrive. Someone with an untouchable presence doesn't constantly adjust their posture, avoid eye contact, or nervously fill every silent moment with unnecessary conversation. They move with deliberate pace because they understand that confidence rarely needs to hurry. Even simple habits, standing with relaxed shoulders, making steady eye contact, and pausing before speaking, send powerful psychological signals. Psychology teaches that people instinctively associate controlled movement with competence and authority. Without realizing it, observers begin assigning greater value to everything that person says. Fear, when understood correctly, has little to do with intimidation and everything to do with uncertainty. Machiavellian influence doesn't require threats. It requires unpredictability. People naturally become cautious around someone whose limits they cannot clearly define. If a person never reacts the same way twice, never reveals every intention, and never feels pressured to explain himself, others begin calculating their own behavior more carefully. The unknown occupies more mental space than the obvious. That's why controlled unpredictability often carries greater influence than open confrontation. A practical example appears in everyday conversations. Most people answer every question immediately because silence feels uncomfortable. But someone who has mastered psychological dominance isn't afraid of a brief pause. When asked an important question, he thinks first, allowing silence to do part of the work before answering. Those few seconds make his words appear more deliberate and valuable. Ironically, people often assume deeper intelligence simply because someone refuses to speak faster than they think. Silence isn't empty. It quietly increases the perceived weight of every sentence. Eventually, people stop reacting only to his words and start reacting to his presence before he even speaks. The room becomes more attentive, conversations subtly shift, and others instinctively measure their behavior around him. Yet perception alone isn't enough to create lasting influence. The greatest challenge comes when emotions, rejection, and manipulation attempt to break that carefully built image. That's where the next layer begins, and where emotional detachment becomes more than a strategy. It becomes a shield. Before we continue, there's something you need to know. If what you've heard so far has made you realize how much power comes from psychology, strategic silence, and controlling perception, don't stop here. I created an ebook called The Silent Influence Code, inspired by timeless Machiavellian principles and modern psychology, for people who are ready to stop being overlooked and start commanding respect naturally. Inside, you'll discover practical psychological strategies to build an untouchable presence, master emotional control, influence how people perceive you, and apply timeless Machiavellian principles to real-life situations. This isn't theory. It's a step-by-step guide you can start using today. If you're serious about becoming someone people instinctively respect, click the link in the pinned comment and get your copy now. Then come back, because what you're about to learn next will make even more sense. One of the greatest misunderstandings about emotional detachment is believing it means becoming cold or incapable of caring. In psychology, genuine detachment has nothing to do with the absence of emotion. It is the ability to prevent emotion from becoming the driver of every decision. Machiavelli understood that the person who loses emotional control first usually surrenders control of the situation as well. That's why emotionally disciplined people don't suppress their feelings. They simply refuse to let those feelings dictate their actions. They respond with intention instead of reacting out of impulse, and that difference changes everything. Many people unknowingly hand others the keys to their emotional world. A compliment lifts them too high, a criticism knocks them too low, and rejection makes them question their own value. Someone developing psychological dominance slowly breaks that cycle. Praise is appreciated, but never depended upon. Criticism is examined, but never automatically believed. Rejection becomes information rather than humiliation. This quiet independence makes manipulation dramatically more difficult because people can no longer predict which emotional button will produce the desired response. Imagine receiving a message designed to provoke guilt or urgency. "I guess you don't care anymore." Most people immediately rush to explain themselves, defend their intentions, or fix the other person's emotions. Someone practicing strategic silence does something different. He pauses, asks whether a response is truly necessary, and refuses to let someone else's emotional pressure become his emergency. Often, after a little time passes, the situation loses its intensity on its own. What once felt like a crisis is revealed as nothing more than an attempt to gain emotional leverage. Machiavellian influence grows stronger when a person understands that silence can communicate confidence more effectively than endless explanations. The more someone feels compelled to justify every choice, the more authority slips away. On the other hand, when decisions are made calmly and defended only when truly necessary, people begin sensing quiet certainty beneath the surface. It's a strange paradox of psychology. The less desperate someone appears to be understood, the more seriously others tend to take them. Certainty has a way of speaking, even when words are few. Another powerful habit is learning to observe emotional patterns instead of isolated moments. Someone with an untouchable presence pays attention to repeated behaviors rather than dramatic episodes. A single apology means little if disrespect keeps returning. One compliment doesn't erase months of manipulation. Looking at patterns instead of promises protects judgment from temporary emotions. It's similar to watching the tide instead of individual waves. You stop being distracted by what changes every minute and begin understanding what rarely changes at all. As emotional independence becomes stronger, influence starts feeling effortless rather than forced. People sense that this is someone who cannot be controlled through praise, fear, guilt, or rejection, and that realization quietly changes every interaction. Yet, mastering the inner world is only half the equation. The next challenge lies in projecting that strength outward, creating a presence that influences people before a single conversation even begins. There are people who walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention, not because they're louder, wealthier, or physically stronger, but because something about their presence quietly changes the atmosphere. Psychology suggests that people constantly read invisible signals long before they evaluate words. Someone who has studied Machiavelli understands this instinctively. He knows that influence begins the moment others notice him, not the moment he starts speaking. An untouchable presence is built through countless subtle details that most people never realize they're broadcasting. Those details often decide who naturally leads and who automatically follows. One of the greatest advantages a person can develop is becoming an exceptional observer. While most individuals are busy wondering how they're being perceived, the wiser person shifts his attention outward. He notices who constantly seeks approval, who becomes defensive under pressure, who interrupts to feel important, and who remains composed when tension rises. This habit transforms every social interaction into valuable information. Psychology rewards observation because every repeated behavior reveals motivation, insecurity, and hidden priorities. The one who observes the most usually needs to guess the least. Strategic silence becomes even more powerful when combined with patient observation. Imagine entering a negotiation where everyone immediately starts defending their positions. Instead of rushing to present arguments, he listens carefully, allowing the other side to reveal far more than they intended. People often expose their fears, priorities, and weaknesses simply because silence makes them uncomfortable. They rush to fill every pause without realizing they're giving away the very information that creates psychological dominance. Sometimes, the strongest move in a conversation is allowing the other person to keep talking. Scarcity also changes perception in ways most people completely overlook. Someone constantly available becomes predictable, while someone who protects his time naturally appears more valuable. This isn't about playing childish games or pretending to be busy. It's about understanding that attention is a limited resource. Machiavellian influence grows stronger when every conversation, commitment, and response is intentional instead of automatic. The person who chooses carefully where to invest his energy quietly communicates that his time has genuine value. People instinctively respect what cannot be accessed without purpose. Body language reinforces everything that silence and discipline have already built. Calm, breathing, measured movements, relaxed posture, and steady eye contact communicate certainty before a single sentence is spoken. Even during moments of disagreement, someone with an untouchable presence doesn't rush to prove himself. He remains physically composed because he understands that panic spreads through movement just as confidence does. Psychology consistently shows that emotional states are contagious. When one person remains calm while everyone else becomes reactive, he often becomes the emotional reference point for the entire group. Eventually, people begin adjusting their own behavior simply because of his presence. They choose their words more carefully, become more attentive, and unconsciously seek his approval without fully understanding why. This is invisible control, not manipulation through force, but influence built through consistency, awareness, and discipline. Still, every form of influence is tested sooner or later. The moment inevitably arrives when protecting that authority requires firm boundaries, unwavering discipline, and the courage to make difficult decisions without emotional hesitation. Most people lose respect long before they realize it, and the reason is surprisingly simple. They teach others that their boundaries are negotiable. Psychology shows that every time someone tolerates repeated disrespect, broken promises, or manipulation without consequences, they silently communicate what they are willing to accept. Machiavelli understood that kindness without limits often invites exploitation rather than appreciation. An untouchable presence is not built by pleasing everyone. It is built by making it clear that certain lines simply cannot be crossed. Respect begins where endless tolerance ends. Strong boundaries don't require loud confrontations or dramatic speeches. In fact, the people with the greatest psychological dominance usually enforce them with remarkable calm. If someone repeatedly wastes their time, they stop making themselves available. If trust is broken more than once, they reduce access instead of delivering emotional lectures. Their actions become their message. This quiet consistency confuses those who expect endless explanations because they discover that consequences speak much louder than arguments. Discipline always carries more weight than emotional intensity. One of the hardest lessons to learn is that saying no is often an act of self-respect rather than selfishness. Many people agree to favors they don't want to do, attend events they don't enjoy, or tolerate conversations that drain their energy simply to avoid disappointing others. But someone practicing emotional detachment understands that protecting his peace is not an act of cruelty, it's an investment in clarity. Every unnecessary obligation steals attention from goals that truly matter. Ironically, people often begin respecting someone more after hearing a calm, confident no. Strategic ruthlessness is frequently misunderstood because people confuse it with aggression. They imagine domination through anger, intimidation, or revenge. In reality, Machiavellian influence is often much quieter. It means making difficult decisions without allowing guilt to sabotage them. It means walking away from relationships that repeatedly undermine growth, refusing to negotiate core values, and accepting that not every conflict deserves another chance. Psychology reminds us that protecting long-term stability sometimes requires short-term discomfort. Wisdom is measured not only by what someone builds, but also by what they are willing to leave behind. A practical example appears whenever someone repeatedly disrespects a clearly established limit. Most people respond by giving another warning, then another explanation, and eventually another opportunity. The cycle never ends because nothing truly changes. Someone with psychological dominance behaves differently. He states the boundary once, reinforces it through action, and allows the consequence, not another debate, to complete the lesson. Over time, people stop testing those limits because they recognize a pattern of consistency that cannot be manipulated. Eventually, discipline transforms from something he forces himself to practice into something that defines his identity, protecting his time, his attention, his standards, and his emotional balance becomes effortless because these choices no longer require internal debate. Others begin sensing that this is someone who cannot be pressured into abandoning his principles. Yet one final piece remains before true mastery is complete. When silence, discipline, influence, and emotional control merge into a single identity, an entirely different level of power begins to emerge. By this point, the greatest transformation is no longer visible only in behavior. It has become part of identity. Psychology teaches that lasting influence is never built through isolated techniques, but through habits repeated until they become instinct. This is exactly where the lessons of Machiavelli reach their deepest meaning. Strategic silence is no longer a tactic used occasionally. It becomes the natural response to chaos. Emotional detachment no longer feels like self-control, because emotional stability has become the default setting. An untouchable presence is no longer something he performs, it is simply who he has become. People begin noticing changes they can't quite explain. Conversations feel different around him. Arguments lose their power because he no longer needs to win every debate. Attempts at manipulation fail because there is no emotional button left to press. Even those who once underestimated him start choosing their words more carefully. This is the quiet nature of psychological dominance. It doesn't demand recognition. It changes the environment so naturally that others adapt before they consciously realize they are adapting. One of the greatest paradoxes in psychology is that the person least obsessed with controlling others often develops the greatest influence over them. That happens because his attention has shifted inward. Instead of asking how to make people respect him, he focuses on becoming someone worthy of respect, regardless of who is watching. Ironically, this absence of desperation becomes magnetic. Confidence without the need for validation feels authentic. And authenticity quietly commands attention in a world addicted to performance. Imagine two leaders facing the same crisis. One panics, raises his voice, blames everyone around him, and desperately tries to appear in control. The other speaks slowly, listens carefully, makes deliberate decisions, and never allows pressure to dictate his behavior. Which one would people naturally trust? The answer has very little to do with titles, and everything to do with presence. Machiavellian influence isn't about creating fear through intimidation. It's about creating certainty when everyone else is overwhelmed by uncertainty. This level of mastery requires constant maintenance because human nature never stops testing discipline. There will always be people seeking attention, provoking emotional reactions, questioning boundaries, or offering temporary rewards in exchange for lasting compromises. Someone with an untouchable presence understands that every decision either strengthens or weakens his identity. That's why he protects his standards, even when nobody is watching. The strongest form of power is the ability to remain consistent when there is no audience to impress. In the end, the true crown of untouchability is not worn by the person who controls every room, but by the one who has learned to control himself under every circumstance. His silence carries weight, his discipline creates freedom, his emotional stability inspires confidence. and his actions speak long before his words ever need to. The world responds differently because he has become different. That is the highest expression of psychology, the deepest lesson behind Machiavelli, and the foundation of a life defined by quiet authority instead of loud approval. If there's one lesson to take away from everything you've heard today, it's this. Real power is never something you demand. It is something you become. Every moment you choose discipline over impulse, strategic silence over unnecessary reaction, and emotional detachment over emotional dependence, you're building an identity that very few people will ever possess. That is the essence of psychology, the deeper wisdom behind Machiavelli, and the path toward true psychological dominance and an untouchable presence. Now the question is no longer whether these principles work. The real question is whether you're willing to practice them consistently when nobody is watching. Will you continue reacting the way everyone expects? Or will you become the person whose calmness, self-control, and quiet confidence completely change the way the world responds to you? Remember, your future isn't shaped by one dramatic decision. It is shaped by the habits you repeat every single day. So, tell me in the comments, which lesson challenged your way of thinking the most? Which habit are you going to start applying today? I'd genuinely like to hear your thoughts because the strongest insights often come from people who decide to put knowledge into action. And if you enjoyed this video and want to keep mastering psychology, Machiavelli, Machiavellian Influence, strategic silence, emotional detachment, and a mindset that creates an untouchable presence, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications. There are many more lessons ahead, and each one will help you think more clearly, act more strategically, and build the kind of influence that never needs to announce itself. See you in the next video.